webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello. Thank you for joining our webinar, Financial Benefits of Breakfast After the Bell. My name is Emily, and I'm just going to quickly cover some of the housekeeping before handing it off to my colleague, Summer. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties today, go ahead and chat any difficulties you're having into the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. The chat box will send that to everyone in the webinar, so make sure you enter them in the question box so that they come to me specifically. And we also love to hear your questions, and there will be time for some Q&A at the end of today's webinar. So please go ahead and send any questions you have throughout the webinar into the question box as well. Even if we don't have time to answer all of your questions, we'll follow up with you afterwards via email. We'll also be sending a survey after the webinar, and we'd love to hear your feedback, so please take some time and fill that out afterwards. We'll also be sending the webinar recording and slides for you to refer back to. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Summer.
Thanks so much, Emily. Hi, everyone. Welcome today. I want to run through the agenda first so you all know what's on deck for the next hour. First, I want to start out with some introductions so you know who will be on the webinar. And then we'll do some level setting with Breakfast After the Bell so everyone's familiar with what we mean by Breakfast After the Bell and that terminology. And then we'll dive right into startup costs and talk a little bit about universal breakfast, as those things can definitely affect your financial bottom line. And then we'll hear from our experts to hear their experience with Breakfast After the Bell and their own financial experience. And then I have some resources to pass along that I think might be helpful that are specific to Breakfast After the Bell and budgeting. And then we have some time for questions at the end. So we have a full agenda with lots of great information coming your way. So like Emily said, I'm Summer Kriegshauser. I'm a senior program manager here at No Kid Hungry. My focus is on school breakfast expansion using those Breakfast After the Bell models, which you'll hear more about in this webinar. One of our experts is Hitesh Haria. He is from Vallejo City Unified School District, and he is a Chief Business Officer, Chief Financial Officer, and has some great information to share. And Christy Blower, who's a coordinator at the West Virginia Office of Child Nutrition in their Department of Education. So two great speakers that you'll hear from a little bit later. So who is No Kid Hungry? If you're not familiar with No Kid Hungry, it is a campaign by Share Our Strength. We're an organization dedicated to ending hunger and poverty. We have our No Kid Hungry campaign under Share Our Strength. We have Cooking Matters, which is a nutrition education program, and then Community Wealth Partners, which are consultants. So No Kid Hungry, what our campaign does is we work on feeding kids by increasing access to the federal meals programs. Our focus is on expanding access to school breakfast, after school meals, and summer meals by working with schools and communities to make these programs run smoother and really meet the needs of the kids. We also teach families how to make the most of their food dollars, and this is part of that Cooking Matters program that I just mentioned. And then we work with elected officials at the national, state, and local level to pass policy to end childhood hunger. We are so proud to say that we work in all 50 states. As you can see, the orange color means we have deep community investments in those states. And then the yellow color means that we are granting in those states, granting funding, and there's that nutrition education Cooking Matters programming in those states. So let's do a poll. I'd love to find out who exactly is joining us today. So a poll should pop up shortly on your screen, and we'll give you about 30 seconds to fill this out, but we'd love for you to identify if you are school nutrition staff or school nutrition director, a school business official, a principal, perhaps a No Kid Hungry partner, or someone else that's joining us today. So we'll leave the poll open for just a little bit longer, and then we can get a sense of who's joining us. Emily, how does it look? Who's joining us today?
All right, it looks like 40% of you are school nutrition directors or staff, 5% of you are school business officials, and about 20% are No Kid Hungry partners, and 35% other.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. That's such a great representative of folks on the line, and I think you'll all get a lot out of this webinar. So let's dive into Breakfast After the Bell and talk a little bit about the basics. So we all know that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but why is that? We know that for kids without food at home, starting with the day with breakfast leads to higher test scores. We know this for a fact. No Kid Hungry did our own research on this. Even 17% higher on standardized tests. That's huge. We know that kids who eat breakfast attend 1.5 more days of school per year on average. Those two things combined create a 20% greater chance of graduation. Now, those are numbers that school administrators can understand. So a child being hungry is more than just a hungry belly. It's more than hunger pains. It really affects their ability to focus, their ability to learn, and it actually shows that it affects their attendance as well. So these are very big issues that a small thing like school breakfast can have such a big impact. So why does traditional breakfast in the cafeteria not work the best for students? And when I say traditional cafeteria breakfast, I mean breakfast that's served in the school cafeteria before the official start of the school day, so that kids have to eat in the cafeteria. So first, the bus or the carpool may not arrive in time, and this may be no fault of the student at all, and so they just don't have time to eat before breakfast, or excuse me, before school in the cafeteria. There's also a stigma that school breakfast is for low-income kids. So rather than face that stigma, kids will often skip breakfast. We also see that middle and high school students are just not hungry first thing in the morning. They have very different sleep patterns, as I'm sure you know. They go to bed later, they get up later, and so for them to eat breakfast before 8 a.m. Is pretty much a no-go. So their hunger comes on later in the morning. We also sometimes see that just the way the campus layout is, the cafeteria just isn't convenient for students, and they don't have time to eat that breakfast before they head over to their first period class. And then we also see that socializing is just more fun than eating alone in the cafeteria. We see that if students have the choice of playing with their friends before the school day in the playground or going to the cafeteria to eat by themselves, they always choose to play with their friends. So what is the solution? We want to make breakfast a part of the school day because that addresses those common barriers that I just talked about, and it really levels the playing field and ensure more students are able to start the day with a healthy meal. And it's helpful for students to know that they're going to get breakfast every day in the morning if they come to school. And when I say breakfast after the bell, I mean that that's a serving model where breakfast is served after the official start of the school day, 10 to 15 minutes after the first bell rings. So I want to highlight what the Breakfast After the Bell participation rates are, just to give you a sense of what kind of participation can be reached. Now, these data points are measured by average daily participation of free and reduced school breakfast over average daily participation of free and reduced school lunch. So we are measuring that free and reduced cohort of lunch eaters. We are not measuring total enrollment of students, so keep that in mind. But these numbers are still pretty great in my opinion. So breakfast in the classroom, we can see 88 participation rate with offering and serving breakfast in the classroom and allowing students to eat in the classroom. With Grab and Go, there's a 59% participation rate, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about what these models actually look like. And then Second Chance Breakfast, where breakfast is served a little bit later in the morning, can reach 58%. So these are pretty great numbers and pretty great options for students. So what is breakfast in the classroom, and what does this look like? So breakfast is offered and served in the classroom and is eaten in the classroom. It's important to provide students with a place to eat if you're offering breakfast outside of the cafeteria. They're more likely to participate if they know they have a place to eat. So The whole process takes about 15 minutes. That includes cleanup. And as you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 pictures. And this is an example of what breakfast in the classroom looks like for the whole process from start to finish. Each school is different, we know that, but this is one example of how breakfast in the classroom works in some of the schools that we've worked in throughout the country. So as you can see, photograph number 1 is cafeteria staff getting those breakfast items ready. They're being placed in rolling coolers, and those rolling coolers will then be transported to the classroom, as you can see in photograph number 2, by a student helper. And we highly encourage student helpers because that takes the burden off of the cafeteria staff, because they might be busy doing other breakfast things, but also it provides students with leadership opportunities and gives them a chance to be responsible. And of course, these roles will be rotated. You know, each week you can change your student helpers, but it also provides buy-in. It helps students create ownership with the breakfast program. So then photograph number 3, you see a student reaching for her reimbursable meal, and it's important to onboard students so they know exactly what to expect and what a reimbursable meal is. And then photograph number 4, you see the coolers ready to be transported back to the cafeteria after the breakfast service. So this can be done by a student helper or by a cafeteria staff member. So here we are with grab and go. Breakfast is offered or served from one or more central locations, either via carts and kiosks placed in high traffic areas, such as heavily trafficked hallways, or oftentimes just the entrance to school is a great place to put these carts. Or we also see grab and go done via quick cafeteria line if the cafeteria is convenient for students. Students then grab their breakfast and take it to a classroom or a common area where eating is allowed, and then they have their breakfast. And so with these photographs, you see picture number 1. This is a fully loaded grab and go cart with all the goodies ready to go. Photograph number 2, you see a student picking up his reimbursable meal from a kiosk. Photo number 3, you see a computer there, a laptop, and this is included because this is the point of sale system, and this is very important when you're implementing a grab and go model, because this is the best way to track student participation rather than doing hand counts. So we highly encourage this, and when you're budgeting for your grab and go program, if you want to do grab and go, you should budget for a POS system as well. And then photograph number 4 is a big giant trash can in a hallway. And this is important because when you are taking food out of the cafeteria and into the rest of the school, you have to have appropriate places for students to dispose of their trash, whether it's in the hallway or in the classroom, and oftentimes both. And then second chance breakfast. This is where breakfast is offered or served between first and second periods, so a little bit later, or even during a mid-morning break. This is excellent for those middle and high school students where hunger comes on later in the day, and you know those students are going to be hungry and they need a meal before lunch, otherwise they're going to get hangry and things may go south. We see this done via traditional grab and go or cafeteria breakfast. So the photograph on the left with grab and go, you see a quick cafeteria line set up, and then the photograph on the right, you see cafeteria model. And we actually have seen very successful examples of schools that have rearranged their schedules to provide a break mid-morning for students, giving them time to come to the cafeteria, get their breakfast and eat, and then resume the regular school schedule. Okay. So now that we're all familiar with breakfast after the bell, let's dive into those startup costs, because inevitably when you are changing your breakfast model from traditional cafeteria to breakfast after the bell, there will probably be some startup costs, and this is totally normal. And so we want to go through what that looks like. So what I'm presenting now is some research findings that Share a Strength did a few years back. And these are financial implications of statewide breakfast after the bell legislation. So in September of 2016, Share a Strength partnered with Prismatic Services. And the goal here was to determine financial implications that school breakfast legislation would have on schools. We did quantitative and qualitative analysis in Virginia on schools with 40% or higher free and reduced eligibility. We used school breakfast participation data in public schools that we got from Share Our Strengths, which means we granted those schools, and so we received breakfast participation data that way. And then the Virginia Department of Education also provided us with participation data. We also conducted 17 telephone interviews with food service directors from a geographically representative sample, and then we also sent out online survey requests to all Virginia food service directors. So we really tried to get a large amount of information that would tell us how breakfast after the bell legislation would really affect school nutrition budget's bottom line. So there were two major categories that we saw costs incurred. One is equipment and one is labor. And I want to start off with the equipment and the supplies. So there was a large range of equipment and supplies cost. The average range from $50 to $3,000, and I know that sounds like a lot, but it's really dependent on the size of the Breakfast After the Bell program, how quickly you want to implement, and really the scale of which you want to implement. So for example, if you are doing a grab and go model that, let's say it's a quick cafeteria line, then you may not be purchasing any more equipment. You may be purchasing maybe just some grab and go bags that students can pick up that reimbursable meal and head straight to class. But let's say you are doing a full-on breakfast in the classroom program where you have to buy roller carts, you have to buy bins for storage, you're going to incur a little bit more cost or significant more cost. So let's break down the most common items that we saw in getting that Breakfast After the Bell program up and running. So a cart or a kiosk ranged from $300 to $6,000. So this is a big range, but keep in mind, carts can be retrofitted, they can be donated, so then you just have to make small adjustments to make them exactly what you'd like. We've also seen some very creative school nutrition directors build their own carts with the help of the custodial staff. So, you know, being creative can save some costs. But then we've also seen the average cost of a grab-and-go cart be about $3,500. So if you're buying several carts, depending on how big your program is, you may get up to that $6,000 range. Then, of course, there's the point of sale system, which is highly recommended for a grab-and-go program. And this is $1,000 to $5,000, depending on how many points of sale system you need. So that should be a budget line item for your grab-and-go. And then we have the hot and cold transport bags. This is most common for the breakfast in the classroom to take the reimbursable items to the classroom. You have storage bins, trash cans are a must. We recommend buying trash cans for those classrooms that you know breakfast is going to be eaten in. So that way, after breakfast service is done, you can immediately dispose of that trash and have that trash can be only used for breakfast so that it's not confused with other paper trash, and that way you don't have food in the classroom all day. And then, of course, tubs to hold forks and napkins in the classroom, and grab-and-go bags as well. And grab-and-go bags can be a really fun way to market your program as well, and add some sort of pizzazz onto them or some logos. There are a lot of options here. We did see that the most expensive startup cost item was $10,000 per site, not including labor, but again, it's very dependent on how big your Breakfast After the Bell program is and how quickly you want to implement across all your classrooms in your school or even your district. All right, so let's dive into labor. Additional labor, we saw 0 hours added and we saw up to 10 hours added. 0 hours could mean that the school nutrition director just found a way to restructure the hours of the cafeteria managers or workers that were already there. But then you might need more hours depending on how great your participation increases. There might, you know, be a very necessary need for an additional cafeteria worker to either staff a grab-and-go cart or help with breakfast in the classroom. So the cost increase we saw was $0 to $2,000, and we saw that that labor often went to a cashier, so this could be an additional cashier, prepping those items, getting ready for those items to go to the classroom, and then attending to the grab-and-go. So that could be attending to a cart, restocking a cart, things like that. And a couple of other pieces of information that I think you'll find useful is that we found in this research that districts that implemented breakfast after the bell did not find the process to be cost prohibitive. So if there was a district or school that wanted to change their breakfast program to breakfast after the bell, they found a way to do it. And they did not see those startup costs as too big of a barrier to overcome. Another thing is that participation increases generate more revenue and make up for startup and labor costs. We saw this and heard this a lot, and we do see this also anecdotally in the schools that we work with across the nation, that yes, there may be costs to begin, but because you are increasing access to breakfast, meeting the needs of the kids, you will get increased participation, and therefore you will get increased revenue, and that revenue will make up for the startup costs. So keep that in mind. Something else of note is that if a district is not financially stable before breakfast after the bell, they have a very low chance of being financially stable after breakfast after the bell. So breakfast after the bell is not a magic bullet for those budgets that are already in the red. So don't think of it that way. It's just a great way to get more hungry kids fed. Okay, I want to quickly touch upon universal breakfast because this can also affect your bottom line. So as we saw, breakfast after the bell increases access to breakfast by addressing those common barriers, meeting the needs of the students, which results in increased participation, increased revenue, but there's still the barrier of cost sometimes for students. So making breakfast universal provides students meals at no cost. Therefore, they're more likely to participate in the program. And when we see breakfast after the bell implemented with a universal breakfast program, the participation soars. Breakfast after the bell is great on its own. Universal breakfast is great on its own, but together they really are the gold standard in making sure the most kids get breakfast. You don't need a federal program to implement universal meals at all, but there are two common options that we see that can be very helpful. Provision 2, this locks in the reimbursement rate for 4 years. You have your free, your reduced, and your paid rates. And then community eligibility. This is where schools and districts with 40% or higher ISP, identified student percentage, can qualify, and those are means-tested data sets that result in the ISP. So this is important because CEP provides a reimbursement rate multiplier. So the reimbursement category in CEP, there's only free and the paid rate. There's no reduced rate. So with ISP, whatever that ISP number is, that reimbursement rate is taken times 6. So you get a 1.6 multiplier, and so that free rate is the reimbursement. So we often see schools that have CEP are finding that it's a revenue generator, and then you have excess funds to spend on equipment, to spend on maybe additional labor hours, or to reinvest in the food quality or different menu items. So there are lots of options there. So with that, I want to pass this along to our experts. We're going to start off with Hitesh. And so, Hitesh, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Summer. So I'd like to go ahead and give you just a brief background about myself. If we can go to the next page, please. I'm truly excited to chat with everyone today. I've done breakfast after the bell, breakfast in the classroom, and been dealing with school food services from the East Coast, as you can see, from Washington, D.C. public schools, all the way to the West Coast in Oakland and Vallejo. And I've held all sorts of positions. So I've actually ran food services for a while. I've worked as a chief operation officer and as a chief business officer as well. And my passion for feeding kids started when I was 12 years old. And I grew up in South Africa and was helping feed children, underprivileged kids in squatter camps where poverty was a real issue. So I love two things. I love food, and that's feeding kids, and I love money as well. And this is the absolutely right conversation to have for me. So let's go ahead to the next slide. And someone's already gone through some of this. So I'm just going to reiterate it from a financial perspective. And, the importance for breakfast in the classroom, it increases our test scores. There's better attendance and kids are more punctual. So we know that in a school system, we can spend a lot of money on professional development and making sure the kids have the right textbooks or the right computer equipment, that sort of stuff. But if they don't come to school every day, then, that's an issue. Their time on task gets less. And so we have to spend more money as a school district on interventions and support. So breakfast in the classroom helps kids get to school attending every day and being more punctual. So that helps us from a financial perspective. Of course, there's improved behavior. We want, decreased obesity, good overall diet, more energy, and then, for kids to have that mental focus so they'll be able to learn better. So that's very important. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. So let's go ahead and move on to the next page. And so as we look at this, I want to start with the orange bubble and say we keep students at the heart of everything that we do. So if students attend school every day, that helps with attendance. And in California and in many other states throughout the United States, schools are funded on what they call average daily attendance. So when those students attend schools every day, we get that money coming in our average daily attendance. If they don't, our average daily attendance actually decreases and the revenue coming to the school district as a whole decreases. We talked about increased participation. Someone mentioned, hey, listen, as kids eat more breakfast, it's going to increase your participation. When you increase participation, you increase your food services funds. So that's increased revenue for the food service fund, right? And some school service funds across the nation are operating in the red in the sense that they're taking money out of the classroom in order to operate school food services. And that's wrong. We can do this if we increase participation, and breakfast is where we can really do it. As school districts across the nation as well, we're also looking at, from a financial perspective, increased costs. So there could be increased food costs, there could be increased costs in terms of our labor, minimum wage, pension, benefit costs, all those sort of stuff. So as you're increasing participation and increasing the revenue, those things decrease in terms of the cost factor. Your general fund, which is where the most money comes in for your school district, that's where the average daily attendance really truly helps. And when you're helping the general fund, you're helping the school district overall. Wherever I've worked in the past 6 school districts, there's always been some sort of issue with either declining enrollment or some sort of financial issue, right? So we always talk about cuts and reductions and that sort of stuff. But with increased participation and kids coming to school every day in order to eat with their friends, we get our general fund revenue increasing as well. So really speaking, doing breakfast after the bell helps everyone. It helps our students, it helps our attendance, it helps our food service fund costs, and our general fund as well. Truly, there's a winning from all perspectives on this side. And so as we're going to talk just about our partnerships and that sort of stuff, in terms of encouraging people to do this, not only is it a win for our students, but it's a win for our entire school district. And financially, it makes a lot of sense. So let's move on to the next page. And I want to give you an example of one of the school districts I worked in. It was Memphis City Schools at that time, and they merged with Shelby County Schools. And at that time, they had about 97,000 students. And we started small, and it was a large school system. I think they had 267 sites at that stage. But we started in 20 schools, and we said, we're going to ramp up our breakfast participation. And as we started doing that, we saw participation increase by about 98% in some of these schools. And as you can see, our free and reduced meal percentage there was about 76%. And we wanted to make sure that our kids were fueling up so they were ready to learn. So if you turn over to the next page, we're going to talk a little bit more about participation. And as you can see from these graphs, our participation went up in breakfast in the classroom from 2010 to 2011. If you look at the following year, it's about 1 million meals, then another 1 million meals, and this is just breakfast to the next year, another 1 million to the following year. In 2013, 2014 to 14, 15, we demerged as a school district, so we went through a little bit of declining enrollment. But if you look at those 4 years, every single year, we increased by feeding 1 million additional breakfasts. In that period of time, we were looking at increasing participation overall. So whilst this chart just shows breakfast, in a space of 2 years, we increased participation and got an additional $10 million to our food service fund. So, you know, having an additional $10 million a year could make a huge difference. But even if it was just a couple of $100,000, especially in our smaller school districts, would really make a huge difference for us. And I'm not showing you these large numbers to impress you, but I'm showing you this can be done. It's been done throughout the United States. It's been done in all sorts of school districts with varying sizes. So people have done this, and it makes financial sense to go down this path. We also want to build sustainability, right? So as you look at this participation across these various years, not only do we say, hey, listen, we're starting in 20 schools and we're going to increase it to another number of schools, but we also make sure that it worked for every single site, so we could really get sustainability of kids coming to school every day to have breakfast. So let's move on to the next page. We talk about all the stakeholders, and I keep students at the center of all the discussions because they're truly at the heart of what it is that we do. I mean, with the education industry, our goal is to educate our students. So that's the heart of all the conversations. And whenever I'm talking to any stakeholder, be it inside the organization or outside, we'll talk about some of our partners just now, I always start with student first. That's our goal, is to feed students, put them in front of kids, in front of educators ready to learn. Then we look at it from a staff perspective, and you know, we have our cafeteria staff, our custodial staff, our teachers, you know, making sure that they're aware that the benefits of doing this far outweigh those things that we need to do in order to accomplish this, and together we can do it. Having the board and the superintendent understand that it truly takes a village, and if we're committed to educating our kids, we have to make sure that they're fueled and ready to learn. And from a financial perspective, it makes all sorts of sense to be able to do this. And perhaps, you know, balance our food service budget. And as we're going through additional expenses, as I said, talking about, you know, your minimum wage and other labor costs that could go up, or food costs, let's increase participation so we could cover those things and ensure that our kids are fed. Now, besides this slide looks at all our internal stakeholders. I want to talk about our external stakeholders as well. So I'll move on to the next page. And as you'll see, you know, there are a couple of resources. I've just listed a few. There's many resources out there. So School Nutrition Association, NEA is the National Education Association, and that's where all the teachers work with, you know, and they really promote breakfast in the classroom as well. We have the USDA, we have all our partners, and that could be Share with Strength, No Kid Hungry. There's other organizations as well that want to assist in helping implement breakfast after the bell, breakfast in the classroom, all that sort of stuff to increase participation. So we have internal stakeholders and we have external stakeholders, and we really have to utilize both of those in order for there to be a successful program, in order for there to be a sustainable program. And as we approach all these people, what we do is build coalitions and make sure that we have the support in order to move forward. So if you move forward to the next page, it's like, how is it that we get to implement this? How is it that we work with all our stakeholders to get this done? And so the first part is I talk about sustainability, and some people might be on the call saying, well, hold on, I haven't even started the program and you're already talking about sustainability. What's that about? I start every program with the intention of having it there for a long period of time. So year after year, we're going to continue. We're going to continue doing it better. So when we start implementing breakfast after the bell at a school, I want to be able to understand for that site what makes sense, what adjustments or tweaking do we need to do to ensure that they not only can be successful for today, but they are sustainable over the long run. So we started the program with that in mind. Understanding your revenue generation, right? So there are costs, and we talked about some startup costs, some labor costs, some food costs, but there's also revenue to offset those costs, and by far and large, there might be a little bit more revenue to be able to offset some other stuff that you have. We're not trailblazing in the sense that this has been done successfully in various school districts across the nation, regardless of whether it's a small school district, a medium-sized school district, or a large school district. So really speaking, attending a webinar like this helps improve, but we're not starting, and there's lots of support out there to help us maneuver forward. At the end of the day, we're here for our kids, and we want to improve their learning, and it helps teachers improve test scores as well. So as we're talking about breakfast after the bell, especially in the classroom or wherever it's being implemented, teachers are going to find that their kids are learning more and there's improved test scores. So it's a real win-win from that perspective as well. As we have the numbers of our kids increase, there's more participation. More participation means more revenue, and that helps the food service fund and the general fund. And it's very important as we're talking to all our stakeholders to always go to the benefits slide and keep the student at the heart of the discussion. It's for all these reasons. That's why we're implementing this. And it makes financial sense. It's not like we're losing money. We're going to make money, or at minimum break even in terms of what it is we're doing here. But it makes financial sense to be able to do this. And kids win overall. The other part of influencing is I want to make sure that we get on other people's schedules. So when I was the chief operations officer and my nutrition staff wanted to do this, they got on my schedule. They made sure that they had time on my calendar and came to discuss, hey, look, we want to implement this. Here's the benefits. Here's how it could help. And then together we went out and went to meet with other stakeholders, be it internal stakeholders, be it external stakeholders, but get on people's schedules. Go and talk to them. They help them understand the benefits and what it's going to take in order to be successful in this. And then hear from multiple sources. There are various people doing this across the nation. There are various partners that are willing to help do this. So you're not alone in this. There's, it's not the first time it's being done, but there's lots of different people who can help make sure that you implement this, implement it sustainably. And I like food, I like money, and it's about making money too. So do the right thing in terms of serving our kids. We move on to the next slide. And I talk about golden nuggets. Now, nuggets is not traditionally what we have for breakfast, but I thought that this was extremely essential in explaining, from the 6 school districts that I've had across the nation, this is what, we've put in place to make things successful. The first thing is start small. Start with just a couple of schools and tweak each individual site for success and sustainability. Showed the case studies of what's been done, how other people have implemented, how they've started, what other tweaks they've made. Build a coalition, go and talk to your unions, go talk to your teachers, your custodians, your nutrition service people. Make sure that you're building that coalition. Keep kids at the center of what needs to happen. There are things that need to be done, and sometimes they look like other issues, but we can always solve adult issues. Keep kids at the center of what it is we're doing. Make breakfast the most important meal of the day. It's like the car, right? That a vehicle cannot run without gas. How do our kids learn when they're hungry? We're going to make sure that they eat that breakfast, and that's the most important meal of the day. The last thing, make it easy, make it automatic, make it fun. Have fun doing this, let our kids have fun, and I wish you the best in implementing breakfast in the classroom. At breakfast after the bell too. And now I'll pass it on to our next speaker.
Great. Thank you, Hitesh. Christy, I'm going to hand it right over to you.
Okay. I'm Christy Blower with the West Virginia Department of Education. I'm the coordinator that's pretty much over breakfast here at the state. I may skip a few slides just to make sure we stay on time, but I'll just say skip slide or whatever. So the problems here in West Virginia that we face is we have at least 60% of all our West Virginia children that are needy. We continue to rank high among obesity, and we have one of the nation's lowest median incomes. At least 1 in 4 of our children live in a household that does not have sufficient access to food. Next slide. So let me tell you a quick story. Basically, West Virginia has now a state law, and has since 2013, so a legislative law that is called Feed to Achieve, that makes every school in the entire state have a approved breakfast strategy program, so a breakfast after the bell program. But sort of how this came about is where the story comes from. And we had a legislator that was going to one of his hometown schools and trying to teach children how a bill becomes a law. And when he did that, he allowed them to sort of brainstorm about if they could pass a law in the school, what would it be? And as they, yell out all different types of things that they would like to see happen in the school, the two that sort of kept rising to the surface was extra physical activity time, or extra recess, and extra lunch, or another lunch. And one child raised his hand and he said he wanted to vote for an extra lunch because his brother was hungry at home and many times they didn't have enough food for them to eat, so that he would eat that extra lunch at school and allow his brother to have food at the house for supper. So the whole school decided that the extra lunch was this fake law that they wanted to pass, and learning how a bill becomes a law. And this sort of raised an eyebrow for the senator. It was sort of the first time that he started ever thinking about, what do we have in place in this state to make sure that kids are fed and taken care of, and what's our lunch program? And so it sort of came to my office, where we educated him on, they already do have lunch, but one place we really have area for improvement is breakfast, because we do have cooks already there, we have the food already there, we have menus already planned, but at that time we only had probably around 30 to 35% of kids taking breakfast. And it's for all these reasons that we've talked about on this call, reasons that it's difficult to get access to breakfast if you're running late, you got your backpack on, you got your coat on, it's difficult, you want to socialize, all those different things. So because of this is how the Feed to Achieve law became drafted and basically got introduced to our legislator in 2013. And this was actually a completely unanimous law. It passed unanimously amongst our legislators, and it actually had no fiscal note attached to it. Next slide. So what are the approved strategies that are in the law? It's grab and go, breakfast after first, breakfast in the classroom, or a combination of any of these. It doesn't necessarily have to be breakfast after the bell. That has been some confusion in our state, or people think that it's mandatory that it be after the bell, but as long as they can consume it after the bell, so as long as they can get it, so it can start being offered before the bell actually rings if it's a grab and go and take it somewhere or whatever, but it has to be after the bell that they actually can consume it. So what we see as an approved strategy are any of these four, and they basically have to be approved by our office or me in order to be on their application for approval for us, and then for them to go forward with claiming for breakfast and lunch underneath the National School Breakfast and Lunch Program. Next slide. So basically, we sort of know why these strategies work. We sort of went over this, but one way to make them work, which I think has sort of already been mentioned, but it's one thing to pass a law and to have schools feel like they have to do it, but we had to have a lot of staff, working with the principals, working with the superintendents, and working with the staff and kids, because if those folks aren't involved in making it happen, then it's not going to happen. And it's sort of also an ongoing process. All of our schools have approved strategies, and they're all working well. But again, as you get new principals and you get new superintendents, you sort of have to continually educate and basically prove to them how important the program is and how much it does help, number one, your school and your students, but also helps your overall budget in your county. Next slide. This is a slide that basically shows how we started out in school year 2004 all the way up to school year 2016. So as you can see, the blue line is breakfast, represents breakfast, and the orange line represents our percent needy in the state, and then the gray line is lunch participation. So what was happening, as you can see, is we sort of hovered around 30% there for a long time for breakfast, but yet we had a needy population of around at least, 53%, and we were meeting our needs for lunch, as you can see with the gray line, but we were not meeting it for breakfast. And when you start see it moving up around 2013, again, that's when I said that the law was passed. 2014 is when you really see the increase start to go and those lines start to meet. So not until we started these programs were we meeting the needs of of even our needy kids. And now we've maintained the highest breakfast participation rate in the nation for over 3 years now. Next slide. We sort of talked about this, so go ahead and go to the next slide. We consider an effective strategy a convenient one. So again, it doesn't necessarily just have to be like an after the bell, but it has to be one of those or a combination of things. A lot of our folks in this state have become very creative when it comes to working with what their effective strategy is. For example, some classrooms that are in elementary schools that say put carpet in the classrooms, which I have no idea why they would do that, but they did, that really can't do breakfast in the classroom or even take the food to the classroom for fear of spills on the carpet. What they do is they'll take their entire classroom down to the cafeteria and do like breakfast after the bell like that. So they'll take worksheets down and then they'll eat breakfast in the classroom after school starts, and they sort of do it together as an actual class. So that works well. We have many that actually go through the point of service line in the cafeteria and then take the meal back to the classroom. So they get their reimbursable meal in a bag and they take the meal back to the classroom and eat it. We have some that actually deliver to the classroom. We have kiosks. We have many different ways to make it work. But basically, a lot of times it takes some one-on-one attention. Like we go to schools, we tweak to see like maybe if we just tweak this or tweak that, we can make it work. So each of these programs does have to be individualized to the school to see what works best for each school. Next slide. These are just some West Virginia pictures. This is a picture of a breakfast in the classroom. The one thing I like to point out, and we also had a policy here on the books that as long as they're having breakfast in the classroom, then they're allowed to count that towards their classroom time. Here in West Virginia, there are certain minutes they have to meet. It could be different, I guess, in each state, but they really wanted to make sure that it didn't take away from their actual minutes in the classroom, and it does not. And so what we find, as you can see, these kids in this picture actually eating and doing worksheets or reading comprehension and things like that. As kids, while they're kind of moving with their hands and eating, they tend to pay more attention. So it is a really good time to do like reading comprehension, where you'll read the story to them while they eat their breakfast and then they answer the questions after it's over. So it's a really good way to sort of incorporate the breakfast in the classroom to the actual activities that are educational activities that are going on in the classroom that day. Just more pictures. You can go on to the next slide. This is a picture of a grab and go. Again, it doesn't take a lot of money to come up with a cart. We have given grants before for kiosks, but this is just sort of a makeshift kiosk that you do with one of those gray carts that pretty much every school has, and it doesn't really cost any money at all to get it started. Next slide. This is pictures of collapsible wagons for breakfast in the classroom. Go ahead. These are pictures of kids helping out. Again, it's great to get kids involved in the program. I find that kids really enjoy all these breakfast strategy programs. You really have no complaints from kids when it comes to these breakfast strategy programs, and getting them involved helps even more. Next slide. Go ahead, next slide. Again, when it comes to the money, we actually have a lot of schools in this state that are under the community eligibility provision in West Virginia, because the majority of our schools are over 40% directly certified. So that basically means that the sites qualify. And the way that we actually help schools and counties move on to the community eligibility provision program is to sell increasing their breakfast participation through strategies. We find here in West Virginia that because the profit margin for breakfast is smaller than it is for lunch, so basically it means that it costs less to make a breakfast, and therefore you can actually make a little money on breakfast from your federal reimbursement. It sort of helps offset your cost for lunch if you decide to go on the community eligibility provision program. So not only do we find that it doesn't cost a lot of money to get these programs up and started. To be honest, we gave very little grant money and mainly just partnered with the Dairy Council in order to get bags and kiosks and things like that. But it actually helps make money to be on programs like community eligibility provisions because it offsets the cost of lunch. So again, you're bringing in more money with a higher rate of participation for breakfast. You're bringing in that higher federal money, and it helps offset costs of other things. So for us, it's a win-win. Next slide. We basically use spreadsheets we have a financial individual that works specifically for our program here at the state office, and he has a spreadsheet that can show, like, by increasing your breakfast participation by, say, 5%, 7%, 10%, however high they think that they can go, this is basically how much money you're going to be able to make on the program in order to help offset the cost for lunch. So that's basically how we sort of help sell boards of education on moving to or voting for the community eligibility program. Again, we partner with the Dairy Council for bags for in the classroom. Obviously, their goals are to increase milk consumption, and a great way to do that is through breakfast. So it's a win for them as well. Next slide. This is just a map of all the counties that we have on community eligibility provision. So as you can see, the majority of our state is on that program. And again, the way that counties are able to make this happen and be successful without having the county put in too much money into the program is really breakfast participation. That's the key to making community eligibility provision work in the state. Next slide. Again, just more pictures of the Dairy Council and how we have partnered with them to help with grant money and help with kiosks. Next slide. We also do a lot of taste testings. We try to offer from scratch food as well here in this state. So when we're adding on new items to the grab and go menus or to the breakfast strategy menus, we do a lot of taste testing with granola and with smoothies and things like that. So we try to make it interesting so that kids sort of aren't eating the same things over and over, and we can keep them interested in coming and getting our breakfast strategy food over and over. Next slide. Again, we have a dedicated staff here at the department. There's about 13 coordinators that I work with, and we all are constantly out in the schools doing trainings and talking with principals. And I basically spoke to probably around 40 some of the 55 counties in the state the first year that it happened, to go and convince county boards of education and to convince superintendents that doing this breakfast program, it was going to be good for their bottom dollar, number one. It was also going to be good for their students. And I really see that you can sell the program, or I found that I could sell the program better here in the state through your pocket. And I mean, I hate to say that because I know everybody wants great stuff for kids, and it is great for kids and it's great for attendance. But a lot of times when you're working with county boards, discussing the financial impact of a program like this is the best way to get them to sort of buy into it. Next slide. These are just pictures of different items that we have that we use for the breakfast program. And again, we find that the financial money that you make helps offset the cost of things like breakfast bags and food wraps and extra trash cans and things like that. So we haven't had a lot of trouble with that. Next slide. And again, we've been number one in the nation. We're at around, I think 50, we've actually increased since this president. I think we're around 55% participation statewide in breakfast. And again, that's around a 23% increase. So the strategies definitely work here in the state. Next slide. that's it.
Thanks, Christy. Great stuff from both of you. Quickly, I'm going to just talk about some resources. These are all hyperlinks, so when we send the PowerPoint out and in an email, and it'll be available on our website, you can click these and you should be able to go straight to the webpage that has this information. We have resources from the Institute of Child Nutrition, USDA, and School Nutrition Foundation. And I want to give plenty of time for questions. We have 5 whole minutes left. We already have one question. Hitesh, I'm going to start with you for this question, and then Christy, I'll have you chime in. How did you handle any pushback from stakeholders, and what was your strategy around this?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I always start with keeping kids at the center of what we have. And some of the biggest pushback we got was about keeping schools clean and, from the custodial staff. And we worked with them on making sure that they had the equipment they needed to keep the classrooms clean. And over a period of time, we tweaked whatever needed to be tweaked for that specific site, that specific school. We tweaked and helped them, make sure that it was successful. What happened over time is that the people that we actually got the biggest pushback from, they actually became our biggest change agents over time. So it's working with them to be able to create a solution for success.
Yeah, and this is Christy. We basically, just to add that, we do that as well, but we also look at menus and menu items that you can actually menu for breakfast in the classroom. Like, for example, a lot of folks like to menu those half-cup juices for breakfast, and I suggest to them to give coffee straws with them so that you can actually poke it down the foil and drink that way. Same way with fruit cups. I usually suggest to food service directors not to menu them for breakfast, to save them and menu them for lunch, and then do more fresh fruit for breakfast, because again, peeling the tops off of those fruit cups are difficult and they can make a mess. Not menuing items with a lot of syrup and things like that. So again, we do it through the menu. But again, I also tell the teachers, it's usually a lot of teachers for breakfast in the classroom that I'll get pushback from. And I say, allow the students to sort of own the program. If you, include the students in what kind of foods they want to eat, you help them do cleanup, you have, cleanup sheriff and all those types of things, and you make it fun and you make them a part of the program, they're more likely to own it and to try not to make a mess with it.
That's great advice. I have a follow-up question to that. One of our listeners is wondering if you experience any pushback from the unions specifically and how you handle that. So either one of you can answer.
I can answer. I mean, we basically, what our food service directors do here in the state of West Virginia is they do try to gauge how much increased participation they think they will get. Most of them do not hire more labor before they actually get a feel for, how much increase they're going to get. So they usually wait, and sometimes they do get some complaints from cooks like, you're working us to death, that kind of thing. But again, then they quickly do move part-time staff, full-time staff on as the numbers increase. And so we sort of have an average here, but it's a county decision of like meal per cook hour. And sort of as they push the limits on that meal per cook hour, they start to increase. And what we end up finding here in this state is a lot of cooks like the breakfast program because they increase their numbers, and in the end, it ends up getting them extra help that they wanted to begin with.
And in addition, from a teacher perspective, what I found very useful in some of these school districts is the National Education Agency promotes breakfast, promotes growing the breakfast program, and they align to that. So the local unions, from that perspective, all from a teaching perspective, all report into or work with the NEA. So that helps reducing, saying from the union perspective, we align with regards to this, we are promoting this. So it helps alleviate that kind of pressure from the union saying, we don't want to do this, or we think it will take away from instructional time and that sort of stuff. So it's working with them, but getting alignment from the broader union body from a national perspective.
That's great. And we have about 30 seconds left. So I'm going to take this opportunity to thank both of you. Hitesh and Christy, thank you so much. Your information was so helpful and invaluable in sharing your experience. So thank you so much. For those on the line, again, we will send this recording out to you in the coming days. And if you have any questions, please feel free to respond to the email or visit our website, the Center for Best Practices. With that, thank you again for attending, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.